From the 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning Weather Center. Cloudy skies today will top out at 67, mainly cloudy overnight, 55 for a low temp, 57 right now. Next news at 9, Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Real Estate Revealed with Randy Barcella, Sunday mornings starting at 8.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. What should President Trump do in response to the Iranian attack on commercial ships in the Straits of Hormuz last week? Here's what Nancy Pelosi had to say during her sit-down with Fareed Zakaria at the Council on Foreign Relations.
The Secretary of State says that the attacks on the two tankers in the around the Straits of Hormuz were Iranian, but done by the Iranian government. Do you think that we are in for a possible military confrontation between the United States and Iran?
Well, I certainly hope not, but we have absolutely no appetite for going to war or to be provocative, to create situations that might evoke responses where mistakes could be made. You know, it's one, countries exercise their leverage, they threaten, they this or that, but there could be mistakes made, and that's a very dangerous thing. And if I just may just go back a little bit, what is his motivation? What is their motivation to be provocative with the Iranians? Why did the president turn his back on the Iranian nuclear agreement? What's the logic except some other issue? That it was negotiated by President Obama. We had so many national security experts, whether they were ambassadors, generals, admirals, and all the rest, supporting the agreement as well. So it had official, diplomatic, national security, technical, nuclear, et cetera, support along the way. So why? So then he comes in and undoes that, and inflames the U.S.-Iran issue. Why? What is the purpose? And then to I'm not going to accuse anybody of instigating anything, but for not having a policy that would smooth the waters, so to speak. So again, I think he probably knows there's no appetite for war among the American people.
Why isn't President Trump appeasing the mullahs in Iran? I can't figure it out. What's his motivation? Why is he instigating this confrontation with Iran? I'm sorry, wait, who bombed whose ships?
The Iranians said they didn't do it, though.
Yeah, well, they did it. And I'm sorry, what is President Trump's responsibility for the attack on a Norwegian and Japanese tankers, and those two tankers? Trump is instigating something because he didn't go along with President Obama's and the Democrats' nuclear surrender to Iran. Oh, and here's some cash to sweeten the pot. Oh, really? The generals and so on and so forth. Right. The Obama administration apparatchiks supported the surrender to Iran of nuclear weapons, and a lot of other geopolitical thinkers and diplomats and secretaries of defense and military generals did not. Now, Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, he wants to go not only further than the rhetorical saber-rattling by the administration in response to this attack. He believes that attack demands a retaliatory military strike. Tom Cotton on Face the Nation.
Well, Iran for 40 years has engaged in this kind of attacks, going back to the 1980s. In fact, Ronald Reagan had to reflag a lot of vessels going through the Persian Gulf and ultimately take military action against Iran in 1988. These unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike.
You're comparing the tanker war in the 80s to now and saying that that's the kind of military response you want to see?
We can make a military response in a time and in a manner of our choosing, but yes, unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And of course, the Straits of Hormuz is an important shipping lane, thus the tension there, much like it is in the South China Sea with the Chinese. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Clifford May. He's the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. And I mean, I agree with everything you just said, of course.
Well, thank you. Your colleague, Raoul Mark Garrecht, writing in the Wall Street Journal about just exactly the state of Iran, the state of Iran, if you will. Pelosi seems very nervous about Iran. Your colleague says this narrative about Trump's belligerence and Iran somehow being a victim of it misses a key point. Iran is in no shape for a prolonged confrontation with the U.S. The regime is in a politically precarious position. Explain.
Yeah, the regime's economy has been imploding. Huge unemployment, huge inflation. It's in very bad shape. Thanks to the sanctions that were imposed by the Trump administration without European support, we've put significant pressure on the regime, and they're feeling it. People are within the country are tired of being under Islamist rule. It's 40 years now. They know what it means. They have less freedom and less prosperity than they did even under the Shah. And the pressure is working. So the supreme leader, for 20 years, they've only had two supreme leaders. It's a title that means dictator. The supreme leader knows what to do. It's worked in the past. You do an act of terrorism like they've just done. It's the second time in a number of weeks. And you expect that there'll be people like Nancy Pelosi saying it's time to appease them. Let's lift the sanctions. Let's give them some financial reward. Let's give them what they want. We're scared of them. They're not scared of us. So let's see how we can help them. We're talking about a regime that has been for years the world's leading sponsor of terrorism. Their revolution is based on a single phrase, death to America. And Nancy Pelosi doesn't seem to understand any of that. As for the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, it actually gave this regime a path to nuclear weapons over a relatively short period of time. It made sure they wouldn't have nuclear weapons during the Obama administration, but a few years from now, they would have them, as well as missiles, which they're still working on, that could deliver those nuclear warheads to targets anywhere in the world. Nancy Pelosi astonishingly seems to understand none of what I've just said.
Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, they asked him, on Fox News, he was on with Chris Wallace, are we preparing for war against Iran? And he said, no, but we're considering a full range of options, including military options. So how many troops do you think we will send over there?
We may have troops in the area, but I doubt we'll use them. Look, between doing nothing, total passivity, and war, there are many, many intermediary steps. That's what Tom Cotton was referring to, what Ronald Reagan did. We didn't have a war with Iran in 1988. What we can do when they do things like this is we can punish them. We can put some of the ships, maybe the vessel they used to retrieve an unexploded mine off one of those ships so we wouldn't have that bit of evidence. We can put those ships, we can target them and put them to the bottom of the harbor. We can take away other of their military capabilities. There are all kinds of things we can do, both on the economic front and on the kinetic front, without going to war, without invading. We don't want to do any of that. I don't think that's not in the cards. But you can say we will not let this kind of terrorism continue with impunity. Or we can say, yes, they get to do it. It's their right. It's their entitlement. They can assassinate people in Europe. They can plot, they didn't succeed, to bomb dissidents who are meeting in Europe. They can try to kill people in restaurants in Georgetown, Washington, as they did a few years ago, and nothing will happen to them because all of that's their right. Or we can say there are red lines. Now, what they really hope is that President Trump will draw a red line and then, like President Obama did, not cross it, showing that the United States is a paper tiger, showing they can do what they want in the region and beyond. That's sort of the strategy of Ayatollah. He also hopes the Europeans will sound like Nancy Pelosi and pressure the U.S. You have to do something. You have to give them something so they don't keep bombing these ships. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategic waterways in the world. It is international waters. As long as the U.S. maintains it as international waters, if we don't, the Iranians take it over and it becomes Iranian water, or rather waters of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Nobody else but us has the capability and possibly the will to ensure that that international waters remain international waters. We either do that or we don't.
Continuing on Iran, but also bringing in Russia, the New York Times story over the weekend about the essential cyber warfare the U.S. is engaged in with respect to Russia, targeting its power grid to prevent, essentially Russia's cyber meddling in the U.S. elections, and generally, it's reminiscent of the highly publicized Stuxnet virus that was used back almost a decade ago to attack an Iranian nuclear facility. What was your read on the story with respect to our cyber warfare with the Russians and the utility of it?
Well, there is a cyber war taking place right now. A lot of people are not even aware that's happening, but it is, and we're not winning at the moment. We have 4 cyber enemies or adversaries that are significant. China is the most, and they steal hundreds of billions of dollars of intellectual property, including defense secrets, including personal information on people in the U.S. government every single year. Then you have Russia, Iran, and North Korea. All of them are competent cyber adversaries. We have to show that there is a price, not just for cyber espionage, but for cyber theft and other dangers, because you could be in a warfare situation and they could have capabilities where they don't need to bomb an aircraft carrier. They just make it go in circles, or they simply cut off all the ATM machines in America suddenly. We have to make sure that we're ahead of them in cyber warfare capabilities. And right now, we're not doing as well as we can. The Russians have been meddling for years with propaganda and agitation. They've been doing it really since the Soviet times, since the 1930s. Now they can do it in cyberspace, which is particularly effective. There has to be a price for it. That price doesn't have to be paid with cyber offensive, although that's one of the options we have. We have to look at the various options we have, and we have to make it clear you don't come into our house and steal our possessions, again, with impunity. This is really what we have to think of. Do we say to our adversaries, tell us what we can do to appease you, and maybe you won't steal so much from us or do us damage, or do we stand up to them and say, you're not going to do this, we're actually stronger than you are?
I wonder if half the reason the New York Times wrote the story was to try to cast the president in a poor light. Of course, the big point of the story, in addition to the cyber warfare the U.S. is engaged with respect to Russia, is that, they're working around President Trump. The senior intelligence officials are working around President Trump for fear that if he knew the details, he would stop the cyber warfare that the U.S. is applying to Russia. Do you find that credible?
No, I don't find that credible. Look, I understand that the president would like to get along well with Russia, with China, with the people of Iran. If not this government, I don't think that's really possible. But I understand the inclination. I don't actually think it works out in the end. Whether it's President Bush, who looked in Putin's eyes and saw a good man, whether it's the reset with Russia, we have to understand that Putin sees the United States as an adversary, and Putin thinks that any way that he can diminish American power makes Russia stronger relatively. There may be some places where we can find common ground, but there are not going to be a lot. And on things like cyber warfare, I think deterrence is what we need. In fact, deterrence is what we need in most cases. If we have effective deterrence, we won't be challenged. If our deterrence is not effective, then they'll say, let's see what we can get away with.
All right, now let's move over to China. Oh, Cliff, if only women ruled the world, everything would be hunky-dory. Like Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, who's the subject of 2 million people taken to the streets of Hong Kong suggesting she resign for, there's this word again, appeasing Chinese communists with respect to a proposed extradition law. Now she's reversing course, trying to save her position. And what are we to make of those protests in Hong Kong, and how much of a problem is it for the Chinese communists in Beijing?
Well, we should support the protests that are taking place in Hong Kong. The people are very brave. Something like a quarter of the population came out because they recognize that their freedom and their way of life is absolutely in danger. When the British turned over Hong Kong to China in 1997, the agreement was there would be one country but two systems. The people in Hong Kong would have their freedom. They'd have capitalism. They'd live as they have, prosperous and free. Now what the Chinese are trying to do is violate that agreement and say, well, anybody we don't like, we can extradite back to China. If that happens, they end up in a kangaroo court and then some prison or re-education camp. Keep in mind the Chinese have 1 million Uyghur Muslims, at least that many, in re-education camps, concentration camps of this sort. Right now, the world doesn't seem to mind very much. So for at least the moment, the Chinese seem to be backing off. They seem not to want what's going on in the streets of Hong Kong to turn into a Tiananmen Square situation. That's where people protested a few years back in China, and thousands, literally thousands, were murdered in the streets. But it's not over yet. But we should all be supporting what the people of Hong Kong are doing, because the Chinese are a neo-imperialist power. They intend to replace the Americans as the global leader. And kudos to Trump, at least for this. He's recognized that China